Assalamu alaikum. This is Daniel Oliver here. I am broadcasting to you from Lahore, Pakistan. And as many of you may know, there are protests across the country going on right now about the acquittal of a Christian Pakistani woman who had previously been convicted and sentenced to death over blasphemy. And I think the general idea behind the protests is to defend the honor of Islam and to defend the honor of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. For you Muslims there, for the sake of expediency, I will not say out loud sallallahu alaihi wasallam every time that I mention the Prophet Muhammad. After this, I will simply say Rasulullah or the Prophet, and I may say those words in my heart, but it's just something to let the video flow a little more smoothly. There are 10 things that I think the protesters should be thinking about, and I'm not criticizing the protests, I just have questions. Number one, is this shirk? I'm not exaggerating, I actually want to know. And the reason why is the following verse from Surah Al-Kahf of the Quran, which is the 18th chapter. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ولا يشرك في حكمه أحدا. And nobody shares in his command or in his legislation. Nobody can give law besides Allah, meaning that Allah's word ultimately is and his will is the principles set forth are the basis of all law. And the execution of this woman was based on a colonial era British law. So as Muslims, are we to uphold the law, the ancient laws of the British? Are we to uphold the laws of Allah and his messenger? This is my question. And the word is wala yushrik, and yushrik comes from sharika, which also is the basis of the noun shirk, and shirk is associating partners with Allah. So it is actually saying that for someone else to be the basis of law, that is shirk or polytheism, treating that person like they are Allah or a God, just as worshiping that person or people or ideas would be. Who then are we saying is the ultimate authority in our lives as Muslims for us to protest in favor of this law? In Surah Al-Kahf, this is number 2, in the Quran, it also talks about blasphemy quite strongly. And in no instance is it ever said that the person who says these words, who speaks out against Allah or who insults Allah and his messenger, that they should be killed. Kaburat kalimatan takhruju min afwahihim in yakuluna illa kadhiba. This is an enormous expression which comes from their mouth. They say nothing but a lie, right? This saying that Allah has a son or that Allah has partners. وَمَنْ أَظْلَمُ مِمَّنِ افْتَرَى عَلَى اللَّهِ كَذِبًا. And who does a greater evil than the one who invents a lie against Allah? And these statements are very strong and they're very clear, but never are they followed by, and such people should be killed or punished. Rather, this is the beginning of a presentation of debates and points and arguments and even questions that are left for people who make these claims to answer. So this is a greater blasphemy than someone saying something against the Prophet to say something against Allah, yet and still it's never been called for such people to be executed. Number 3, I actually read on a light post that I usually pass by on one of my normal ways home, and it says, I'm paraphrasing, but it says basically, for anyone who thinks that this woman should be acquitted, know that a blasphemer would be killed even under the shade of the Kaaba. It is in fact true that in a very specific situation, a person was ordered to be killed, and the traditional thing was that if someone would be near the Kaaba, they would be safe. They could always claim refuge and safety there, as it was a holy place. Where in fact, this was not just a common person who casually made a remark. And I'd like to point out the fact that we don't know the facts of the case and what was really said, excuse me, nearly 10 years ago. But let's just say that it's true that the woman did utter some kind of a statement. It's not the same as a person who was an open enemy of Islam and an effective enemy of Islam. And also, it's not the same level as a person who lived with the Prophet Muhammad and his companions. They saw the truth, the proofs, they saw the evidences. They actually heard the Quran being recited, and they lived amongst the best generation. Khairu ummati qarni, said Rasulullah, meaning the best generation is my generation. A person living in that time, living with those people, living with that prophet, is not like someone now. They've seen the proofs and they're obstinately rejecting it. This is kufr. To see something and then do this, wipe it away, and pretend like it was never there. This is not the case in Pakistan. I don't think that anyone will argue that Pakistan makes a convincing case for Islam. Uh, there is, there are just a lot of problems in the country. There are a lot of things that could be better, should be better, um, and they're not. So this is not something where a person is absolutely clear on Islam and they've opposed it in an effective way that damages the Muslims, that stops people from being able to choose the truth, that stops people from being able to realize that it is the truth. It's not the same thing. Um, Greater blasphemies have been committed, and they've been, they've actually not even been overlooked and just forgiven, but turned into, let's say, teachable moments, as they say. A non-Muslim Bedouin walked into the Kaaba, and in front of the Prophet of Islam, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, took out his private member and began to urinate on or near the Kaaba. And even the companions were outraged and they were going to grab this person and pick him up. But Rasulullah said, stop, leave him, let him finish. And when he finished, he said, take water and dump it so that this urine would basically be pushed so far under the ground it would no longer be in contact with anyone. And last but not least, he called this person over and calmly, kindly, gently said, listen, this is a holy place. This is a place for prayer. It's not the place for that. In fact, not only did that person become Muslim, so impressed that what he had done was, overlooked and responded to in such a way, he returned to his tribe and gave the invitation of Islam to them, which they followed and accepted. So how would we be different in our treatment of something which is lesser? A woman in an obscure village in a rural part of Pakistan is actually causing no harm to anyone, even if she does make such a statement. And it's certainly not at the level of, desecrating the holiest place of Islam in front of its prophet. Number five, it is said by the prophet in a hadith or let's say a prophetic narration, that a Muslim is the one from whose hands and tongue the other Muslims are safe. In these protests, people's cars have been greatly damaged. People who their bikes have been, they've been thrown off their bikes have been thrown down and been destroyed. And obviously through these actions with all the road closures, schools have been closed for days. Islamic schools have been closed. Exams have had to be delayed. People are not able to go to work. People may not be able to go to get medical care that they need because it's on a part of town that they can't reach. So this is something that has caused a lot of harm. It's a lot of grievance, a lot of agitation. If you can imagine a school schedule where you have at least 2 days now that have been canceled, well, this is obviously something that's going to disrupt the entire school year. So this is causing harm and damage and difficulty to the Muslims, and it's not helping them in any way. These protests are basically, I would say, in many ways, a way of people making up for the lack of religious practice in their life. When you are in this country, you will find that most people don't pray. I mean, if you're in a given environment and you see the number of people who stop to pray when the adhan is the call to prayer is out loud, you don't see any break at all. The majority of people, I would say, don't pray. Over 50% for sure do not pray regularly. or at least you don't see them. I mean, you can always say that husna done, think the best of people. Maybe they do it when you don't see, but you see them doing other things. Why don't you see them pray? So how are you now protesting for something that you don't even practice? I would say even there's quite a large number of people who don't even fast, and these are things that anyone can do basically. So this is actually something where we should focus on the principles of our religion and actually consider that to be piety rather than going after symbols and slogans. Um, and number seven, this is in fact preventing people from worship. Uh, People who travel to study the Quran, or teachers of Quran who study to meet their students, which is a very popular activity in the after school hours, are missing days of that now because of the traffic blockages. So they are actually blocking people who are seeking Islamic knowledge. Either their schools are closed, so not just the schools of secular subjects, but schools which teach Islamic and academic subjects, or schools that are wholly Islamic, they're closed. So imagine that because of allegedly something that's supposed to be for the sake of Islam, a person is not able to study Islam. A person who's learning how to pray and learning about fasting, learning the Arabic language, is being prevented from doing so now for days. Those studies and those practices are being interrupted. If there's an imam who is actually serving a community which is far from his home, he would not be able to reach it. So, in the name of Islam, they're actually blocking Islam. Number eight, they are indeed harming Muslims because uh, people are not able to go to work. This is going to cause disruption to the market, meaning the rupee may devalue, which means the money that people are earning honestly is worth less. Prices may go up. The petrol price has already gone up. I don't know if that's related to the protests or rupee devaluation or something else. But instabilities like these block investment in the country. So this is actually hurting people in a lot of different ways. Number nine, there is no precedent for this in Islam. You don't see from the early generations of Islam, or even from the earlier nations of Islam, meaning previous prophets who came with the same message, that there would be this type of protest where roads would be blocked and someone would make a point by literally agitating, irritating, causing grievance to others. There's no precedence for this. So should it be classified as a bid'ah, as an innovation, something which someone does allegedly for the religion or for Allah, which is in fact not part of the religion? I'm not a scholar, but I think that's a good question to ask. Allahu a'lam. Allah knows best, but there are people whom we can ask. Number 10, there are so many other things that actually make a difference that they should be protesting about. Um, this incident of blasphemy is basically a statement that was allegedly made by a woman in a farm in rural Pakistan more than 8 years ago. It could have been 10 years ago or more. I don't know the exact date. In fact, I don't think that any damage was done by this. And in these areas, let's focus on what really goes on even in the rural areas. Very high rates of illiteracy, very low rates of religious practice. You see people not even praying the Friday prayers there. They can't read anything, not even Arabic. So even if they're participating in prayer, they're just mouthing and repeating sounds. It's not even words to them because they don't know what it means. I have a clear enough understanding of Arabic so that there's a lot of the Quran and a lot of even lectures that could happen in Arabic that I would be able to understand, a lot of hadith. But I think most people don't have that. So that's what people should be protesting. Why is there so much illiteracy? What should we do about that? What about the sexual assault and pedophilia? The sexual abuse of children, which happens even in Islamic communities and even by the exact same Islamic leaders who are now calling these people to do these protests. Maybe not in name, but in general, it's known that in these so-called madrasas and these so-called Islamic schools and people who claim that they're teaching the Quran, it's very common that they molest young boys. And there's a lot of sexual assault outside of Islamic institutions in the society. There should be protests against that, to stop that in the society, to stop the victimization of young boys who are actually supposed to be trying to study the religion and are in fact being traumatized and abused and exploited and raped. There should be protests against the condition of the roads. The roads are very bad here. It's universal. Even in the nicest areas in defense, you find very few smooth paths. And if they are smooth, they don't stay that way for long. They're very poorly built. This causes a lot of damage, and it's a lot of public funds have been spent on these, and the money is obviously being wasted. Why aren't people protesting about that? I think that that's something that Muslims should protest about. Umar, when he was the Khalifa, the ruler of the Muslims, said when he was in Medina, which is basically the western part of Saudi Arabia, that I fear that if a donkey breaks its foot or breaks its leg in Iraq, that I will be called to account for it. Meaning, if hundreds of miles away in Iraq, if there's a problem in the road and someone's riding animal gets hurt by it and an animal goes through pain and injury by it, then Allah will call me to account. Why did you hurt that animal? Why did you, damage the livelihood of this person? So how come we're not protesting the roads here? Um, there should be protests against riba, usury. This economy is based on usury. It's a very well-known fact that Pakistan borrows money every year to make up for its budget, and that money is borrowed from non-Muslim entities at who charge interest. So it's being paid back in interest. The agreements are being signed in interest for all Pakistanis. This is the national economy. So how come they're not protesting against that when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that taking riba is worse than so many different kinds of crimes, and the least of those crimes would be to commit incest with a person's own mother in front of the Kaaba. The least of the crimes which taking interest is equal to is to do incest with a person's mother in front of the Kaaba. This is an enormous blasphemy. It's become so commonplace that there's a proliferation of vehicles on the road and appliances in people's homes and hands solely based on the fact that they have access to credit through borrowing usurious loans. The killing of children, the killing of female children found in dumpsters, dead babies, dead babies of any religion, or the parents of any religion. The fact that these babies are being killed and left for dead because they are girls or because the families are poor, that should be protested against. Why aren't people protesting against that when Allah says in the Quran, and don't kill your children because you fear poverty? Specifically, don't kill your children before you kill because you fear poverty. And Allah says in the Quran, specifically, He condemns people for killing children because they are female. And that's exactly what happens here. Word for word, Jahiliyyah. This is one of the, trademarks of the Jahili Arabs, the pre-Islamic Arabs, is that they would kill their female children because they were female. And that's exactly what happens here. Jahiliyyah right in front of everyone's face. Why not protest against the practice of caste in Pakistan? Because these same protesters will protest and stand for this blasphemy, but will they stand against the fact that they won't even marry their own within their own families? They won't even marry their own children to each other. As they're protesting side by side, you would not marry your children to him because he has a different family name than you. Would these leaders that you follow allow you or allow their children to marry your children, oh, you protesters? Or are you beneath them? Do you know not to even broach that subject? This is the same type of tribalism that was practiced in Jahiliyyah. It's the same type of tribalism and caste that's practiced in India right now. Some of the Muslim so-called castes, if a caste can be considered Islamic, have the exact same names or are simply just branches of Hindu castes. But, Bhati, Bhatia, which one of those last names is Muslim? Which one of those last names is Hindu? When Muslims meet here, the very first thing that they say to each other is they find out what each other's caste is. So how come nobody is protesting against these practices, which are clearly blasphemous, which are clearly injurious to Muslims, and instead focusing on the words that may have been said years and years ago by someone off in a village, and it made no difference to anyone. It's simply that her Muslim neighbors decided to turn against her. These are very poor people, abused, oppressed, living as slaves on feudal estates. As slaves, there's no other word for it. Even if you say serf, the word serf comes from servus in Latin, and servus in Latin means slave. Slaves, instead of protesting against their own slavery, are fighting and trying to kill each other. So these are the things that I think that the protesters should think about while they are protesting. I'm not saying don't do it, because they're being told to do it by people who are known to be scholars. And I don't know what proofs the scholars have brought to justify and validate these protests. And I myself am not a scholar. And even if I were, I haven't had a chance to debate them or to at least have heard them out or have read them out. But at the very least, it's always wise to ask questions, because we're going through this experience, we're going through this difficulty, we're going through this hardship. We should wonder and we should know what we are getting from it. What will be the goal of these protests? To overturn the acquittal? It's not going to happen. To stop her from being able to leave the country? It's not going to happen. But is your life going to change? Are you going to have better and more regular electricity? Are you going to have a better environment? The smog in the environment, is that going to go away? Are you going to somehow find a way to have better air to breathe, to have better water to drink in the next 10 to 15 to 50 years, as Pakistan is known to be a water scarce country and one of the hardest hit by climate change? What is actually going to come of this? Those are the questions that we should be asking. Assalamu alaikum. Peace.